Hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the podcast today, I have attorney and activist Robyn Gigl, who tackles the complexities of gender, race, power, and public perception in By Way of Sorrow, which is her debut legal thriller. Welcome to the podcast, Robyn.
Alan, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
You know, I should have asked you beforehand. Did I butcher your last name?
No, and in fact, you got it absolutely perfectly correct. So I figured you must have had help somewhere along the line.
Oh, good. Well, yeah. Sometimes I'm way off, and sometimes I'm on. So I'm glad I was on there. So can you give a little bit about your background? I already mentioned you're an attorney and an activist, but can you tell us a little bit about your background before you started writing thrillers?
Sure. I have been practicing law for 43 years. I do primarily employment, commercial litigation. I'm with a law firm called Gluck Walrath in Freehold, New Jersey. And I am a transgender woman. So that has informed both my law practice and now in terms of my writing career, By Way of Sorrow involves a transgender attorney. So I have kind of taken what's something unique about my life in terms of being an attorney, being out and open as a transgender woman, and turned it into something that I could write about.
Yeah, I think that's so cool because they always say you're supposed to write what you know about, and people say, "Well, I don't know about thrillers and killing and all that stuff," but they're like, "Well, but you can still put your life in there somehow, right?" I mean.
And what I always tell people is the main character in the book, her name is Erin McCabe. And I always tell everybody Erin McCabe is not me. Erin McCabe is 35 years old. I'm not 35 years old. Erin McCabe is a very attractive transgender woman. I'm not. But Erin is a transgender attorney who practices criminal defense law. And for many years, up until probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I did a fair amount of criminal defense work. And so when you said, write what you know, that is true. I am an attorney, I am a transgender woman, and I've done a lot of criminal defense. So that was the perfect marriage of all three things to write a legal thriller.
And were you a fan of the genre before you started writing your own books?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed, legal thrillers, both, and I say I have always enjoyed courtroom dramas, be they legal thrillers or non-fictional books about, the courtroom and trials and things like that. So yes, that's something I've always enjoyed.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating. I think that's why true crime is so popular. I'm a true crime junkie, so.
There you go. Because I mean, you see it in real life, but then when you see it on television, you read about it all the time. And so, yeah, and it's something that we all feel we know something about just by osmosis. We've, acquired, whether you Law and Order or whatever, we've all kind of had those experiences or seen those experiences. And then to read about true crime and what really happens, it can be fascinating.
What are some of the authors that influenced you as a writer later on?
I mean, certainly, I would say Scott Turow in terms of the basic legal thriller. When I read Presumed Innocent when it came out, probably 30 years ago now, it's been out, I think, in the 80s. That was the book that just grabbed me in terms of what a legal thriller could do. More recently, I can't think of anybody offhand that has influenced me in terms of legal thrillers. Certainly, there's a lot of people that I admire who write in the crime genre, but not necessarily legal thrillers. Certainly Walter Mosley is somebody that I really respect. Cheryl Head, who is another woman of color, has a great series going. So there's a lot of people that I really admire and enjoy their writing, but they're not necessarily writing legal thrillers.
And so By Way of Sorrow, that's your debut novel, right?
It is.
Correct? Yeah.
It's in the sense that it's the first novel that's been published. I finished another manuscript, but that book was never published. And when I look back on it, I say, fortunately, it was never published.
Yeah, we all have those, don't we?
Yes.
And so, is it a standalone, or is it going to be part of a series?
Uh, no, well, the answer, I said no. It's not a standalone. It is part of a series. When Kensington acquired it, my editor John Scagnilio was kind enough to sign me to a 2-book deal. So
Nice.
there will be a part, not part 2, but a second Erin McCabe thriller. And depending on how By Way of Sorrow does, and the second book is called Survivor's Guilt, that comes out on January 25th of 2022. Depending on how they do, you know how it works. If they flop, that's the end of the series. But if people like them, I'd be happy to continue to write Erin McCabe thrillers for a while.
And what was your journey like then? From like you first got the idea for the book, you started writing it, to finding an agent, I'm assuming, and publishing it. How was that like?
In my case, I was fortunate enough, as I said, I finished a manuscript before By Way of Sorrow, and that's when I got my agent. And she was shopping that book around, and as she was doing that, I was doing a lot of reading and trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do next? And I happened to reread To Kill a Mockingbird. And I know To Kill a Mockingbird is not a legal thriller, and I'm not comparing my book to Kill a Mockingbird. But what was fascinating, and it had been decades since I had read To Kill a Mockingbird, what was fascinating to me was how much of that story is about the trial of Tom Robinson. And so in many ways, it has that classic legal thriller element to it. But as I was reading it, I was frustrated by the fact that we never get Tom's point of view, because everything is told from Scout's point of view. And I was wondering, what's going through Tom's mind? Here he is, a Black man in the 1930s in Mississippi, accused of sexually assaulting a white woman. What was Tom thinking? And so as I was thinking about that, that was kind of the genesis of me starting By Way of Sorrow. And I started with the character who is accused of the crime. Her name is Charisse, and she's a transgender woman of color who also happens to be a sex worker, and she's accused of murder. And as I started to kind of think about it and plot it out, I said to myself, while Charisse is integral to the story, I can't tell the story from her point of view because that's not my lived experience. She's a woman of color. She's had a much different lived experience than I have. And so that kind of then brought me to Erin, who is Charisse's lawyer, who I felt more comfortable centering the book around because it's, again, more of my lived experience.
And so how much research did you put into it to prepare for that?
So number one, I do know a lot of transgender people in terms of my activism and other things that I do. So as I was doing it, I shared the story with obviously some friends and some people I knew who dealt a lot with trans women of color, and said, I really want your help, your input, your feedback on whether I'm getting this right, because I want this story to be authentic from their standpoint too, or from Charisse's standpoint. And so, I made sure that I was talking to people, and it's not just in Charisse's case. Erin's partner is an African American male, so I was bouncing it off, again, friends of mine who are Black male attorneys, and saying, do I have this character right? Is it authentic? And I think all of us, I can't just write a story that's inhabited by 60-something-year-old trans characters. I have to, you want a diverse character base, and we all have to put in the work to make sure that our characters are authentic, even if they're coming from places that we don't necessarily know from our own experiences.
And what's the balance for you, especially being an attorney, with of yes, we want the courtroom stuff, but then you don't want too much courtroom stuff. How does that work?
It's funny that when I started it, it was going to be a pure courtroom drama because, as I said earlier, that's something that I've always been drawn to. But as I started to write the story, it became less about what was taking place in the courtroom and more about, number one, the characters, but number two, the central question to the book is, was it murder? Was it self-defense? And so the investigation that that Erin and her partner Dwayne are putting in to try to prepare if they do have to go to trial. So it turned out, yes, there's courtroom scenes and yes, there's some courtroom drama, but it turned out not to be the courtroom legal thriller that I originally envisioned.
And what's your process like? Do you outline, or do you like right by from the seat of your pants?
I've had both experiences. I will say that By Way of Sorrow was much more fly by the seat of the pants. It was an idea that came to me, and I just was able to really see it almost as a whole right from the start. As I said, it evolved over time. All books do as you start to write it, and what I had seen as a courtroom drama kind of evolved into something else. But it was very much fly by the seat of your pants. Now, I said that when my editor signed me, it was a 2-book deal. Of course, before they want you to start writing your second book, they want to see an outline of it. And so for Survivor's Guilt, it was definitely more of an outline where I set and mapped it out in advance. And of course, as you start to write it, things change a little bit. But I've had both experiences, and I think I tend to be a seat of the pants writer. But then as I've started to think a little bit more about, okay, if there's an Erin McCabe book 3, what would it be like? I find myself mapping it out a lot more than I thought I would.
Well, so that's interesting. So you already had the first manuscript ready, and then you still had to do the outline for the second one?
Yes, as By Way of Sorrow was going through the editing process, the line edits and then the page proofs and everything else, as that was happening, I was starting to work on Survivor's Guilt.
Oh. And how was that process like, working with editors and all that whole process?
I am very fortunate. Number one, John is just a wonderful man to work with and has been really helpful to me throughout. The line editors that I've had at Kensington make me appreciate how much I know about the use of the English language. They've been wonderful. So for me, the experience has been great. And I also, with both books, before I submitted them, I used an independent editor, a woman by the name of Andrea Robinson, who, she kind of, went through them in terms of, are there plot holes? And I won't say she did a line edit, but she did a lot more than just reviewing the manuscript. She really helped me out with a lot. So I owe a lot to Andrea too.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. I'm doing that now with one that I'm going to be shopping out later on. When I'm finished with the manuscript, I'm actually going to hire somebody a line editor to go through it before sending out to agents, just to make sure.
Yeah, and again, I can't say enough good things about Andrea. I mean, she was very helpful to me in terms of grammar and line edits and things like that, but also just in terms of finding those holes in the plot that you don't always see and saying, you said this here, but then you say this here. So she was fabulous. And at least for me, it helped a lot.
Yeah, isn't that amazing how we're so into our story that when they point it out, then you see it. But at first, it's just like goes right over.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is crazy. And what do you use to write? Do you use like a Word or like some other software program?
No, I am old fashioned. I just use Word. Peck away at my laptop. I watch. My son also happens to be an author, a published author. He wrote a book called The Ferryman Institute, and he used to write on his phone as he was, taking the path into New York from New Jersey. And I don't know how he did it, but I'm still very much a hunt and peck type of typer.
Yeah, I see people on the phones too. I haven't mastered that either. We were dating ourselves, but yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is a generational thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was wondering too now with this crazy year that we've had with the pandemic, did that change your process at all or your writing style or your system?
I don't know how other authors feel about it, but for me, I don't want to say the pandemic was, made life easier, because obviously it's been devastating to a lot of people, and I don't want to make light of it. But for someone who's a bit of an introvert, and I find joy in writing. It's, to me, writing is not work. My work is being a lawyer. When I come home and maybe I'll go for a short jog and have dinner, I'm thinking about what I'm going to write when I'm jogging, and then I come home and I get on my laptop and I start writing. To me, that's fun. And so the pandemic kind of gave me an excuse to just say, well, I can't go out, so let me write. And in a bizarre way, obviously, I think that we've all experienced different traumas in terms of things that we couldn't do, and obviously a lot of people had some losses that were horrendous. But from a writer standpoint, the isolation was not necessarily bad.
And how are you planning to? I'm asking this to my guests now. How are you planning to address the pandemic? Are you going to address it in future books? Are you going to ignore it?
Fortunately for me, By Way of Sorrow was set in 2006 and 2007, and Survivor's Guilt is 2007, 2008. So if there should be an Erin McCabe book 3 or book 4, it would still be, a decade before we fell into the pandemic. So, for me as a writer, I don't have to address it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's a nice out.
And it's funny because, I said it in 2006, 2007 for a couple reasons. Number one, I didn't want anybody to think that I was writing about them, because there's lawyers and judges and politicians, and I didn't want anybody to think, oh, you're writing about so-and-so. I wasn't. I made them all up. But the other thing was, when I started it, President Obama was president, and so it looked, in terms of transgender issues, like we were going in the right direction. And as I was writing it, I was like, oh, maybe nobody's going to think that these problems are real when this gets published, if it ever gets published. So let me set it back in a time when people were less familiar with transgender issues. Of course, I couldn't predict the history that we would have, in terms of the election, and then all the things that have gone on over the last 4 years and the last 6 months in particular, in terms of transgender issues and people trying to pass bills attacking trans kids and transgender healthcare. So in that sense, even though I said it in a time that I thought was going to be, people could say, okay, 2006, 2007, people really didn't know that much about transgender issues. That's why they're not friendly. We can fast forward to 2021 and say, yeah, they're still not friendly to transgender issues.
Yeah, I think that people don't understand that, right? I mean, there's a lot of violence against transgender people. I mean, it's just I can't remember the stats, but it was like mind-boggling to see the stats.
Yeah, no, and unfortunately, every year on November 20th, the transgender community holds a Transgender Day of Remembrance, where we remember all the trans people throughout the world who have been murdered just because they're transgender. And I can't give you the number right off the top of my head, but it's last year it was 230 or 250, and so it's just horrendous.
Yeah, that's just crazy. Yeah. And so what's next for you? You say you have the second book is coming out in January. Are you working on the third one? Are you waiting? What are you working on now?
Well, as we speak, I'm kind of plotting out book 3, in the hopes that book 1 and book 2 will do well enough that somebody says, yes, we want a book 3. Obviously, if books 1 and books 2 don't do well, then who knows if there'll be a book 3. But I have something in mind. I am plotting it out, and I will sit down at the typewriter at some point, or the laptop at some point, and actually start putting some words on a page, probably in a month or so.
All right. And then I always ask my guests, because I have aspiring writers that listen to this, any advice for an aspiring writer that's listening to us?
Oh, absolutely. I started to write my first novel. I was 30 years old, maybe 28 years old. It was about 40 years ago. I never finished it. I mean, this was before I was out as a trans woman. I had a new legal career. 3 kids came along. The life of of a parent, of a lawyer with a busy practice. So that book never got finished. And then, as I mentioned earlier, after I had come out and transitioned, I wrote a manuscript, finished it. It was shopped around. It didn't sell. And here I am at 68 with a debut novel. And so I think what I'd say to most people is, number one, if you have the dream to do it, don't ever give up on that dream. I had that dream 40 years ago. It finally came true. I would, having gone through the process of looking for an agent and getting all those rejections that most of us do, and then shopping a novel around and getting those rejections because it never got picked up, I would say to people, don't look at those things as failures. The fact that if you've completed a manuscript, or if you've gotten an agent, that in and of itself is a success. And so don't get discouraged. Don't take those rejections as failures. Take them as learning experiences, because all of us, and I think every writer will acknowledge, you can always do better than what you've done before. And those experiences help you to do better. Hopefully you learn from each experience, and it makes you a better writer as you go forward.
Yeah, that's good advice. And so where can where can people find you? What's your website?
RobynGigl.com. I'm on Instagram at Robyn Gigl. I am not on Facebook. I think I'm the only living human being in the United States that's not on Facebook, but I'm not. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Robyn Gigl. So that's primarily it, but certainly the website is RobynGigl.com, and on Twitter.
Okay, all right, Robyn. Well, thank you so much. So your the book is out now, By Way of Sorrow. So
Yes.
people should go check that out.
Please.
And yeah. So yeah.
Especially if you want to see a book 3, you gotta.
Yeah, come on. We gotta
gotta
do your part. Come on, people. All right, Robyn. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Alan, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to be here.
Thank you.